welcome back to the channel. So tonight, a little bit later than planned, we have a full spoiler recap of The Ice, book 3.5 in the Bound and the Broken series by Ryan Cahill. Now, this is a little later than normal because it took me multiple hours to skim read through the book again and write on my notes, because I'm not the kind of person who can read and write notes at the same time, so I did have to go back through. I've got my tablet in hand here, so what I'm going to do is go through my 3 A4 pages worth of notes, which is kind of the major beats and my personal observations based on those from throughout the novella, and then at the end maybe we can have a little bit of a final chat about the book. So I want to get straight into this because it's going to be a long video. Now, chapter 1 is called The Plan. This chapter is where Aeson is convincing Arthur to pledge Beldoaran resources to the mission to go to Valacia. Now, if you didn't know what this book is about, then, well, I mean, you shouldn't be watching this because it's a full spoiler recap. But essentially, in the Bound and the Broken series, one of the major plot points in the first book is that Aeson has gone to Valacia, which is kind of this evil Antarctica, basically, in the world of the Bound and the Broken, where people go to try and explore and take resources and stuff, and very, very few of them come back, because it's such a savage, wild place where basically everything is out to kill you, from the weather to the wildlife to what have you. Now, in the first book, which is called Of Blood and Fire, Aeson has come back from Valacia with a dragon egg, and The Ice is the story of how he got that dragon egg and how he brought it back to Etheria so that it could, the egg could bond with Kaelin and hatch into Valeris, and then give Etheria its first free Dralade in 400 years since the fall. By the way, due to the nature of this book, even though it is a prequel, because it's set after the other books, there may be spoilers in my notes and discussion as we go through. So really, if you are spoiler sensitive, you shouldn't be watching this video, because it's the latest in a series of 3 books, 3 novellas. But also, if you're spoiler sensitive, I'm going to spoil the shit out of all of this stuff. So again, this is your very, very last warning. I've already spoiled a couple of minor points, but please switch off. I'd love to see you again when you've read the book. It does not take long. So we hear Arthur is kind of like, why now? Why are you going to Valacia? We always knew that there were dragons in Valacia. And we find out that Belina has met a woman trying to drink herself to death in a bar in the middle of some foreign place, where this woman says that she saw dragons in Valacia, but that she specifically saw dragons the size of horses. And what that means is that those dragons are younger because of the way that dragons grow. Aeson knows that those dragons are younger, so he knows that they have hatched since the fall. So he knows that Valacian dragon eggs are hatching. So the next step is getting a Valacian dragon egg. Aeson also, at the end of this chapter, has a really nice chat with Ivan Arnell, who is a major character in all of the books, I think, really. But he's got a really strong presence in book 2 and book 3. And, well, he won't be in it going forward because, as you know, he dies in book 3. But they have a really good talk on the battlements. And I have to say, I think I'd like to see a bit more of Ivan, and I would almost be interested in the story of how his wife and son died, because that's something that Ryan has hinted at multiple times across the books, and it'd be cool to see that story play out. Chapter 1 is fairly short and simple, so we're going to move straight on to chapter 2. So in chapter 2, this is called The Crew, and in The Crew we are going to meet the crew that's going on the trip. So Aeson gets to the boat. He's introduced to Kayala, who is the captain of the ship that they're using to get to the Icelands. He also meets there Verma, who is an Arcarian. She's Aeson's friend from before the fall, and Arcarians are the kind of elite creme de la creme of the battle mages of the Order. Aeson says that there are 3 who are still alive, but Verma's the only one kind of on our side, as it were. The others are working for Fane Mortem. Now, Verma is a great character. Her chemistry with Aeson is really cool, because she's known him for so long. They're also very close, even though we haven't seen her in the books before. It's very, very evident that they're really, really close, and that he trusts her kind of implicitly. We also meet Akraff, who is the first mate of the ships, and he becomes more important in this book simply because when Kayala won't take Aeson without getting all the gold up front because they might die on their trip, Aeson says, well, if you have all the gold, what's to stop you from dropping us off in Valacia and then leaving? So Akraff kind of becomes that bargaining chip. So he goes with the land crew, so that Kayala can have her full gold payment. He seems like a really interesting character, basically straight from the off, and although he doesn't have a lot of page time throughout the novella, I definitely want to see more from Kayala and Akraff. I think that they're a really cool duo. It's also revealed that Akraff is Kayala's lover, and she basically says to Aeson, like, if you come back without Akraff, don't bother coming back because I'll kill you, which is fun. We're also introduced to Pilvir, who is another old friend of Aeson's. He is a crafts mage, and he's been Aeson's friend for hundreds of years, and he has 2 daughters who are also with him, Andira and his youngest daughter Lyril. Finally, we're introduced to one more character, which is Malari. Malari is the woman who saw the dragons in Valacia, and she's basically suffering with PTSD. She's completely shell-shocked from her experiences in Valacia. Dane and Belina are also in this chapter. It's really great to see Dane and Belina together because they're really fun together. But also it's really cool to see Aeson and his point of view for telling us about Dane, because the Aeson kind of sees him differently to the other characters, and it's quite cool. Oh. Sorry, did I mention it's like almost 11 o'clock at night? I don't really edit small gaps out of my videos, so that's staying in. Enjoy that yawn. Chapter 3 is called The Reason. The Reason is basically part of the boat journey. So it's all set on the boat, and it's all the characters. It's Aeson kind of checking in with people, basically. It's a mostly conversation heavy chapter without much kind of doing or action. We learn that Eric and Darlin are doing their daily training in the same way that Kaelin does in the other books, and Eric and Darlin are their training has inspired the mercenaries and the crews of the boats to kind of get involved and join in, which is fun. There's some really genuinely lovely moments in this book, but there's some really strong ones in this chapter between Aeson, Darlin, and Eric. Kind of some like really strong family vibes here. I think that Ryan Cahill is genuinely excellent at writing the family dynamic, and he's really on form in this book in particular. Not much else to talk about in that one, to be honest. It's not a hugely long chapter, but also, like I said, it's mostly just conversations, and it's hard to recap that without recapping every single word, so you kind of know what's happening there, really. It's not got really any major story beats. Next chapter is called Landfall. It's the 4th chapter. So, this is where Kayala tells Aeson that she'll kill him if he doesn't bring Akraff back. They go to shore in some like rowing boats, and there's lots of sea snakes in the water. So Aeson kind of uses the spark to reach out and kind of sense the life around him, and he senses thousands of these sea snakes, which are a lot like the worms from Jafengan in Of Darkness and Light. They're kind of giant eel-like, reptile-like snake things. And when he talks about how many they are and how deadly they are, that is what we call foreshadowing. Malari reveals in this chapter that her sons were killed on the expedition that she took to Valatia previously, and she essentially assumes that they're all going to die, but Aeson has promised to set her daughter and granddaughter up for life, to pay them Malari's section of the money that she's been allotted. So Malari's kind of at that point now where, you know, her sons have died, and all she wants is just to be able to provide that good life for her daughter. She tells Aeson that it's going to take around 3 weeks to get to where she saw the dragons on her expedition, maybe slightly more. And she also talks about the demons, which are a race of monsters that live on Valatia and that plagued the expedition that she was on. At the end of this chapter, 100 warriors remain. That's also what we call foreshadowing. Chapter 5 is called Warnings. Let's take a quick sip here. Warnings is basically the first night in Valatia. Malari begs Eric and Darlin not to take the first watch when they volunteer, and she kind of won't let them not do it. So they relent, and they go and sit with Aeson, and they're chatting with him. There was one point that I really picked out from this chapter, which is that when they kind of sit down with Aeson, Eric is eating some of the rabbit that they caught earlier that day, the fresh meat that's been cooked. But Darlin doesn't eat. Darlin kind of knows how slim the hunting was and how little they were able to gather, and he doesn't even ask for any of the fresh stuff. He just gets the salted meat straight out of his bag. And I think that's a really interesting contrast for Ryan to make specifically between the two brothers. We also learn throughout the course of the book, I won't mention it when it comes up, it's a bit later on, that, in fact I think it is in this chapter, that Eric doesn't really remember their mother. So Darlin is a few years older, and Eric was only kind of 4 or 5 when she died. So he doesn't really remember her now as an adult, but Darlin has a memory of her, and I think that's a lot of the difference there, in that Eric has grown up with mostly Aeson's parenting, whereas Darlin has had that full family experience. But it's interesting that you'd think that maybe the Aeson solo dad would make Eric a bit more pragmatic and a bit more down the line, like Aeson is, but really it's kind of done the opposite. So they talk a lot. Yeah, so it is happened here. So they talk a lot about Aeson's late wife, Naya, and Verma comes over and she reveals. It comes out that she was also, as part of her friendship with Aeson, was very close with Naya, and she tells this really funny story about going to visit Naya, Eric, and Darlin when Aeson was away preparing for a military mission, and he found them. She came to visit, and she found Naya halfway up an apple tree when she arrived, and she tells this whole story about making apple pie. And then there's a really interesting thing where Aeson says, "Oh, I remember that night, and I got home from this mission, prepping for this mission, and he was really angry that she'd not done any of the prep for her half of the prep, and that she'd just spent the day cooking apple pie with the boys, and now he wishes that he's desperate. He wishes that he could have that day making apple pie with the boys that he never got to have." Okay, all right, 16 minutes, almost 17 minutes. We're only on chapter 5. So they all go to sleep after chatting about Naya, and the first watch is killed and mutilated, and they even specifically mentioned that all of their heads were skinned and peeled off their faces while the rest of the camp slept. So, that's not only were these, enemies, whoever was there, able to kill 10, trained hardy guards that they had on guard, but also they did it without making a single sound and waking up a single person, which is, very scary. Malari says that this happened on her expedition too, which is why she begged Eric and Darlin not to take first watch, because she expected that whoever took first watch would die. And Aeson kind of kicks off at her, like, "You should have told us, 10 people are dead because of you." And there's a really interesting debate there where she's like, "Oh, well, if I told you, what would you have done? Would you put 20 people on watch? Would you put 30? They'd all have died." So, interesting. Now, the leader of the mercenaries, so they've hired some mercenaries to go with them to Valatia, and the leader of the mercenaries is a man called Garalin, and Garalin basically says to Aeson, like, 7 of my people have already died, and this is creepy and awful, and this is way worse than I was pitched. So I'm out. He basically goes, like, "I'm out. I'm taking as many of my crew with me as want to come." And so they go and they stay behind in the cave where they've left the boats, and they hope that by showing that they want to leave, that the demons that killed the rest of that killed the guards will leave them alone. So 30 people go with Garalin. And so at this point, we are at 63 warriors left. I know I said 100 and roughly 30 go with Garalin, but there was no exact number given for the original. It was the original tally was around 100 warriors. I'm guessing if 31 have gone with Garalin and 63 are left, that there were 94 originally. But it's not as cool as saying 100 warriors remain. So they're already down, those 31 guys, and they've also lost. Oh no, they lost those 10 people as well. So it would have probably been like 100 and something. Chapter 6. So in chapter 6, they've been marching inland for 2 weeks. 15 other people have died. 48 warriors remain. Verma and Aeson are talking. So she actually apologises to him then for not going to Naya's funeral, She says, we were really close and I should have gone to be with you in your time of grieving. And Aeson's like, well, everyone grieves differently. I don't hold nothing against you, which is nice. The dwarves that are on the trip with them say that they're sick of drinking the melted snow water, which is what everyone's been drinking. The Spark Wielders have been using threads of fire to melt snow to give everyone water to drink. And they say they don't want to drink the snow water anymore. They want real fresh water. And so they go to a nearby body of water. And unfortunately, that body of water is full of worms. And the sea snakes, the worms, attack. It's kind of the first big action set piece in the book. From here on out, there's action pretty consistently in every chapter, but this is kind of the first big scene. It's a really good battle scene. There's never too much that you can talk about when it comes to recapping action sequences. The major plot point here is that Pilvir's youngest daughter, Lyril, is killed, and it's actually quite sad, even though you know almost nothing about her. She died, and the reaction from the other members of the party kind of tells you how well liked she was and how sad it is. So 10 people have died in that battle. If you also take the 15 warriors away, we are now at 38 warriors remaining. Chapter 7 is called The Ice, It Hungers. Some ominous chapter titles here, eh? Almost like this book's quite dour. Not in a bad way. So in this section, they're marching through a snowstorm. Several of the weather patterns that happen in the book, snowstorms, are described as being unnatural, and they kind of explain it later on in the book. Ryan explains it later on in the book, and it's quite fun when you get there. So from here on out, the chapter descriptions are much longer. My notes are much longer. Pilvir, whose daughter Lyril has just died, he tells Aeson that it was Lyril who actually convinced him to join the expedition, and wrote this piece of dialogue down because she said, "Look, if Aeson Varandir calls, we answer." And I thought that was quite cool. Then as they're kind of walking through this snowstorm, and they're all tied together with ropes so they don't lose each other because the snow is so thick they can't see more than a few inches in front of their face. As they're walking through this snowstorm all tied together, Aeson suddenly hears the whoosh of dragon wings. The group is attacked not by dragons but by the Makarian, which are called black hearts. They're kind of like giant snow tigers, and they're insanely deadly, and they have like sections of black scales on their body, which is why they're called the black hearts. At some point, Aeson sees kind of some figures, like giant men, standing and watching them fight from deep in the storm. He kind of sees the shadows, and he supposes that these are the demons that Malari has been saying, killed her expedition. Aeson from here basically does like the original Assassin's Creed thing, where he like stands in a huge circle of enemies, and he's doing Felantir, the sword movement, where you kind of like parry and defend and take your killing blows where you can. So he's like in this giant circle of like horrible giant cat monster things, and he's just slowly cutting them down as they come for him, and it's pretty cool. He then joins back up with the rest of the group, and they kind of fall back to like a cliff edge, and Pilvir, who is a crafts mage, crafts them a gigantic kind of wall and shelter around them. So he kind of pulls all this raw material out of the world around them, the snow and the ice and the rocks, and builds this kind of impenetrable wall. And now a small number of the Makarian do slip through, though, And in the ensuing battle, Eric and Malari accidentally fall off the edge of this cliff face. And Aeson basically uses every single drop of the spark in his body to save them in like quite a cool sequence. Again, I won't spoil too much, or talk too much about these sequences because they're much more fun to read. But we're reminded here that when Liara, who is Aeson's dragon, died, she took with him his kind of strength and connection to the spark. So while he can still wield the spark, he can still do magic. A lot of the time, maybe it doesn't do what he wants to do, or it doesn't respond to his call, or maybe he can't grasp certain threads. And this happens here. So he's, Eric and him and Malari are almost about to die, and Aeson is kind of struggling to summon the right energies to save them. And there's one point where Malari kind of nods to Aeson to say, like, cut the rope, let me die so that you and Eric can live. And then right just as it seems like they're not going to make it, Eric kind of looks at Aeson and is like, I'm going to die so that you can live, and he lets go of Aeson's arm, and just at that second they're saved by Verma. But Aeson's like real mad with him. He's like, why would you do that? Don't ever let go. Like, I would die with you. Don't kill yourself to save me, which is cool. The interesting thing here, right, is that we know that Eric, Aeson, Darlin are all alive because they're major characters in the future books. But so many times I really felt that they were in peril, and that's how you can tell that Kyle's a good writer, because he can write a prequel and still make me scared for the characters that I know are going to live through it. So the fight with the Makarian, 19 characters die and 19 warriors. So we're now at 16 warriors remaining. Chapter 8, Demons. So we're getting near to the end now. There's I didn't write the titles down for chapters 10 or 11. Sorry about that. So they'll be just plain. There's only 12 chapters, and we're on chapter 8 now, and the last 3 are quite short summaries. So chapter 8, 3 nights have passed since they fought the Makarian in the snowstorm, and they're now kind of closing in on the dragons. Akraff says that they only really have 3 days now, or else they're going to have to turn around, because in 3 days that will be the deadline, the halfway point of the deadline that Cahill gave them. So they come to where are we? So Verma kind of talks to Aeson, and she's like, so what was your plan? How are we going to get the dragon eggs? Like, what's going on? And you find out that Aeson's basically like, look, my plan was get here, and then when we're make a new plan, which was, it genuinely made me laugh. We find out that Padrig, who has been essentially so unimportant that I've never needed to mention him so far, is shaken up by the death of his compatriot Cersei. Although Aeson's like, look, can you take the lead with us as we cross this ice field? But I need to know that I can count on you. You can't let us down. And he's like, no, I can definitely do it. Foreshadowing, dear viewer, he dies, like, quite brutally, quite quickly after this. They also have one of the mercenaries that's left as the last remaining, the 16. Ithaca has a sprained ankle. Now, she can walk on it, but she's not very fast. And Aeson's like, look, there's not enough of us anymore to look after you, so if we have to run, we will leave you. And she's like, I would rather take that chance that I can't keep up with you and I die that way, than staying behind and dying by myself, which kind of makes sense to me as well, to be honest. Verma starts shielding them from the snowstorm and kind of making a big air bubble, and she says that the snowstorm is unnatural, echoing Aeson's thoughts from earlier. Then suddenly they see kind of across a gap, like a crevasse or whatever, they see demons watching them, and kind of seeing what's going on. They start running, and one of the young dragons turns up, kind of confirming that Malari was right all along, that there are young dragons in Valacia. The demons jump over the crevasse, a massive gap, without using the spark, and they start attacking the expedition. Now, my theory at this point, right, was that these were like snow Uraks or something, and that they were using blood magic, which is why they were able to jump that giant gap without using the spark. Obviously, I'm proven wrong pretty quickly, but that was just a thought I had. There's a massive battle here, and Aeson is pretty certain that somebody is controlling the snowstorm. At this point is where I remember that druids can control the weather. Some kind of one version of the druidic power set is weather control, as mentioned in Of War and Ruin. So that clues me into like, oh, maybe there's some druid stuff going on here. So they're eventually surrounded by the demons, and they kind of assume that they're all going to die. Aeson then says to everyone, he goes, oh, I'm sorry for bringing you all here. And Darlin and Eric legitimately just start laughing. And Darlin's like, sorry for laughing at this moment, but this is the first time I've ever heard you apologise for anything. Then Verna says she's not heard him apologise in over 400 years. And they all kind of have like a little laugh at Aeson's expense, essentially, for being so like serious and boring. And then a dragon lands down in amongst the group, and Aeson goes out to kind of like commune with it. So obviously, Dralaid and dragons have a kind of a mental bond, and even when it's not your dragon, there's kind of that kinship, and that kind of like that kind of magical feeling that they're kind of the same. And so when Aeson is able to kind of commune with the dragon, he goes like right up to it and touches it and hugs it and stuff. A man comes out, like a hooded man, and he says in common, he says, the time has finally come. This is the path. So at the end of that chapter, we have 10 warriors remaining. Chapter 10. Chapter 9. So the hooded man takes down his hood and reveals that he's human. Originally, I had a suspicion that he was going to be a Dralaid, because I always find it weird when a character in a book is wearing a hood or a mask, and their identity is not somebody who you know. So in this point, because then why bother with the hood? Why bother with the mask? In this particular sequence, the point of him having the hood up is that the revelation is that he's human. It's not that he's somebody we know. So in this particular instance, it makes sense. And he reveals that he's one of the seer druids, and that he can see the future. And he's seen this conversation with Aeson, hundreds of times. He tells Aeson that the demons are actually an intelligent race who make their home in Valacia called the Dakar. And he then takes Aeson on this kind of like private tour. He says they will have to wait behind. He takes them, everyone else has to wait behind. He takes them on like a private tour of the Dakar city, which is really cool. He talks a little bit about their culture. So there's 3 druids. So there's Amak-Kai, who is the main guy, that is the seer druid, although he does say that that's just one of his many names. So I'm going to assume that we will meet him again at some point, or that we've already met him and it's not been clear that he's Amak-Kai. There's also other druids called Baud and Tamsin. So there's some really interesting stuff here about the Dakar's city and their society, and their come of age and how they protect the Icelands. I thought that was pretty cool. So basically, the elves came to Valatia before even humans came to Etheria, so very, very long time ago. And they came to kind of plunder the resources of the Dakar, and the Dakar basically said no, and then the elves decided they were just going to wipe out the Dakar, because as we know, elves are very warlike in The Bound and the Broken. So they decided that they're going to wipe out the Dakar and just take all their resources. The Dakar eventually managed to beat them back and win, but their numbers are severely depleted, and they've only kind of just, in the thousands of years since, been able to kind of fully repopulate the country. Since then, because they've been so wary of outsiders after their first encounter with them, they have been murdering almost everyone who turns up, but leaving one or two people alive so they can kind of spread the legend that if you go to Valatia, you die, to try and keep people from coming, basically. Because they don't want to kill people. This is the thing that is actually mentioned. They go, we don't take joy in it. We're just protecting our home. And Aeson, he understands it. He's protecting Etheria with what he's doing as well. This chapter honestly has loads of lovely little details. There's a great bit where Aeson goes Amak-Kai, why, if you knew I was coming and you had this conversation with me, why did you kill and murder everyone that I brought with me apart from these 10 people? And Amak-Kai's well, until Aeson arrived and communed with the dragon, they had no idea that it was Aeson. They just thought he was any old intruder, because he didn't know exactly when Aeson was going to arrive. Aeson is then given a dragon egg, Valaris egg. He's told it's lain dormant for 800 years in Valatia, and that its line traces back to the oldest dragons to ever live in Valatia, which kind of tells you why Valaris is kind of special, and also, as we know, the druidic blood in the line also makes him kind of special, makes Caelan a special Dralid. Aeson takes the egg, but is then told that it might hatch in a year, or it might hatch in 1,000 years, and that he's kind of got to promise to safeguard it until he can hatch it or bond it to a Dralid, which is kind of fun. Chapter 10. So after they get the egg, it takes them 4 weeks to return to the 4 weeks to return to the boats, to get back out to the big boats to take them back to Etheria. And it's a much quicker than the way up, because the dragons protect them the whole way back, which is fun. They fly overhead and stop any of the predators from attacking them. So we still have those 10 soldiers remaining. They find that all the people who stayed behind, Garlin and that lot, have all been mutilated by Malari and just fully, eaten, destroyed, guts hanging out. It's gross. It's quite vivid. Luren, who is one of the 2 surviving mercenaries of the 10 that have survived, she gets really angry at Aeson because all of her friends, her commander, they're all dead, and she actually threatens to kill Darlin. She puts a knife to his throat, but as that happens, Malari puts her knife to Luren's throat and is is getting your revenge worth your life, because the second you start, I will kill you. Luren gives up. They eventually get back to the big boats, and Kayala is happy to see that Akraff has survived. Akraff's great as well, because he's basically got no like, he's got no stake in the adventure. He's basically just there because he thinks Aeson is cool and wants to spend some time with him, which is quite fun. Chapter 11, again, did not write the chapter title down, sorry about that. So they're almost home, so they're coming up to Etheria, and it's revealed that Aeson has not slept very well. So the whole time they have been going back from Valatia, he's been almost unable to sleep. Mostly, I think this is kind of hinted at this through the guilt of all the people that have died on his expedition. And he is talking to Kayala in the night when he's not sleeping, and she's like, "Why? So if Etheria is not safe for you anymore, why do you still stay there? Why don't you leave? Why don't you just set yourself up with a little private island and get some peace and quiet?" And Aeson says he won't find peace anywhere now that Liara and Naya are dead, and that he does why they did think about leaving when Eric was born, and moving out of Etheria, but now that he didn't do that, he can't rest until he's freed it. He's freed his home. Malari then comes to talk to Aeson and is kind of like, "Oh, this time we spent together, you've been able to get me over losing my sons," and there's kind of a really good character moment there. And then Imperial ships turn up, so the Empire, who you'd almost forgotten because they really hadn't featured in the book at all until this point, they turn up, and aboard those ships, by complete coincidence, is Farda and an Inquisitor. So who I'm going to assume is Inquisitor Rendell, because this is set directly before book 1. Lurin betrays Aeson and tells the Inquisitor that there's a dragon egg. Then a huge battle breaks out. Aeson, Darlan, and Eric, and the other members of the crew are able to escape. However, Malari is killed, unfortunately, in the crossfire. That is 9 warriors remaining, and that's your last update. Because in the final chapter, which is called A Spark to Light the Flames, the gang get to Milltown, which you may remember from book 1, and Aeson gives some orders to the remaining the crew members from who took the expedition onto the ice, the remaining expedition members, and he gives them some orders, which kind of, I don't know about you guys, but that kind of makes me feel like we're going to see those guys again in book 4 or maybe book 5. And as they're walking through Milltown, the book ends on them overhearing Rist having a conversation with the book trader, kind of signalling to you exactly where the ice ends and Of Blood and Fire begins. So that's the end of my notes, and as we're at the 43-minute mark on this recording, that is the end of this video. So this has been a really long one, so if you've got anywhere of the way through it, thanks so much. And please leave a comment below if you would like to see this approach on the other Bound and the Broken books. I probably won't try and do it all in one day in future, or I'll make the notes over a long period of time. But if you'd be interested in recaps for those books, then please let me know and I'll put those together. Drop a like if you like this video. If you are coming to this video much later and after I've posted this, so when book 4 is out or whatever, and you want this refresher, then pop a comment down below just to let me know that this video has been useful to you if it has been. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.